Would you walk away from $900 million just to protect your dignity? This is the true story of a woman who turned public humiliation into a global movement. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly why saying no might be the most powerful thing you ever do. Picture the late afternoon sun splashing gold across Beverly Hills as a sleek black sedan glides up the winding drive. The door swings open, and out steps Ava Monroe, CEO, visionary, and one of the youngest leaders in Silicon Valley's upper tier. She's rocking a navy suit cut so sharp it could file patents, heels clicking on polished marble like a metronome set to power. Tonight's mission: seal a $900 million partnership with the legendary Wolf Dynasty, an old money empire that practically invented privilege. Inside, the Wolf Mansion is everything you'd expect. Crystal chandeliers sparkling like a million flashbulbs, oil portraits of stern ancestors judging from gilt frames, and a driveway lined with supercars that cost more than most people's homes. The second Ava crosses the threshold, the room's pulse shifts. Conversations hitch, champagne pauses mid-sip, and a low current of whispers ripples from guest to guest. Some faces show genuine curiosity, others mild shock. Few imagined that the lauded tech titan making headlines this quarter would be a young black woman. Ava takes it all in with one smooth sweep of her gaze, no rush, no nerves. She's rehearsed for moments like this since her scholarship days at an Ivy League campus, where legacy kids eyed her like she'd crashed the wrong party. Back then, she vowed never to let anyone else define her worth, and she's not starting tonight. Across the hall stands Grayson Wolf, sole heir to the family fortune, suit tailored tight, posture even tighter. He lifts his champagne flute, the smirk already forming. "Did someone mix up and bring the help in early?" he calls, voice dripping sarcasm so thick you could frost a cake with it. A hush falls. Then, uncomfortable laughter, soft, brittle, like glass about to crack. Ava feels the jab land. No human is Teflon, but she doesn't flinch. One heartbeat, a measured breath, and she steadies. Every eye waits for her reply. She gives none. Instead, she offers Grayson a cool, polite nod, as if acknowledging a minor scheduling error, and turns toward the dessert table, though her appetite has vanished. Beside Grayson, family patriarch Edward Wolf says nothing. He watches, lips thin, fingers tight around his cane. His silence weighs more than any insult. It's tacit approval, and Ava catches it like a stone in the gut. Still, she refuses to hand them the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. She straightens her shoulders, smooths a non-existent crease on her sleeve, and excuses herself. The click of her heels on marble echoes louder than any gasp. Guests part like water, unsure whether to admire her composure or breathe easier now that the tension is walking away. Out on the front steps, the fading light paints the mansion in warm amber, but Ava's heart thrums cold. $900 million could transform her company fund moonshot R&D, expand overseas, shatter ceilings she hasn't even seen yet. But a voice inside whispers, "At what price?" She slides back into the sedan, shuts the door with a soft, decisive thud, and stares at the mansion's silhouette shrinking in the rear window. She thinks of every engineer on her payroll who looks to her example, every bright intern who believes the tech world might finally make room for them. Those kids deserve a leader who won't bow to casual cruelty for a payout. The car glides onto Sunset Boulevard. City lights blur past while Ava weighs her next move. Her phone vibrates, a text from the board chair. "Call me ASAP, urgent." She knows exactly why. Word travels faster than fiber optic. Investors are already buzzing about the historic alliance. They'll panic if they smell trouble. Back at the mansion, Grayson watches her taillights vanish. For a moment, just a sliver doubt flickers behind his smug grin. Ava's calm exit unsettled him more than any angry outburst could. But he shakes it off, tells himself power is the birthright of those who were born into it, and turns back to the party, letting the orchestra drown out his unease. Meanwhile, Ava's sedan cuts through downtown. Towering billboards flash her company's logo proof of how far she's come, and how far she could fall. She recalls her first major pitch, years ago, when a potential investor called her kiddo and suggested finding a more seasoned CEO. She'd walked out then too. That firm later begged to buy into her Series C at triple valuation. Principals had paid off before, maybe they will again. She arrives at her high-rise condo overlooking the cityscape, steps into the quiet, and lets the door close behind her. The silence feels heavier than the ballroom's chatter. She pours a glass of water, ignores the growing stack of texts, and paces the floor heels off, resolve on. 1 hour passes. Finally, she dials the board chair. Voices overlap, concern, frustration, the inevitable question. Are we really willing to risk this deal over one spoiled heir's remark? Ava listens, arms folded, gaze fixed on the skyline. When she answers, her tone is soft but unyielding. Respect isn't optional. If the Wolves can't treat partners like equals, they're not partners. There's a long pause. She imagines conference room eyes darting, hands tapping spreadsheets, minds calculating lost revenue. Someone mentions shareholder lawsuits. Someone else mutters, PR nightmare. Ava, steady, repeats her stance. Dignity first. Deal second. The call ends. Ava exhales, shoulders finally dropping. She's not naive, there will be fallout. Stocks can tumble, headlines can sting. But she also knows storms clear the air. This one might just wash away more than it destroys. In that quiet living room, as city lights flicker like distant stars, Ava Monroe steels herself for the battle she didn't ask for, but now owns. And somewhere in a mansion of chandeliers and cold smiles, Grayson Wolf sips his champagne, unaware that the real price of arrogance is about to come due with interest. By morning, the storm had already begun. Ava Monroe's phone buzzed relentlessly. Texts from board members, emails marked urgent, media outlets requesting interviews, all ricocheting in a blur. Her statement hadn't been public yet, but the whispers had turned into headlines, and the board wanted answers before the markets opened. At 7 a.m. sharp, Ava Monroe walked into the boardroom of Bennett Technologies. The city skyline loomed behind the glass windows, but inside, the atmosphere was dense, tight, restless. 12 board members sat around the long walnut table. Some looked anxious. Others avoided eye contact. A few looked outright skeptical. Claire Dawson, her closest ally and vice president of strategy, gave her a small nod, subtle support amid a sea of uncertainty. Ava didn't sit. She stood at the head of the table and spoke without preamble. I know why you're all here. You want to talk about the Wolf deal. So let's talk. Peter Anderson, the CFO, leaned forward, voice already edged with frustration. We're talking about a $900 million contract, Ava. This could redefine our growth curve for the next decade. You walking out last night sent shockwaves. Ava kept her voice measured. I didn't walk out. I upheld our company's values. Margaret Lewis, one of the most senior members on the board and known for her pragmatic bottom-line mindset, chimed in. Ava, we've weathered worse personalities in negotiations. Business isn't about feelings, it's about results. Ava nodded slowly, absorbing the argument like a boxer taking a jab, not shaken, just calculating. You're right, Margaret. It's not about feelings. It's about principles. When a potential partner publicly humiliates the CEO of this company in front of dozens of witnesses, and the head of that family stays silent, what kind of message does it send if we continue to sign that deal? Silence. Then Peter again. It sends the message that we're professional, that we don't let ego get in the way of capital. Ava's gaze swept the room, firm and unblinking. Let me ask you this. If I were a white man in a tailored suit, do you think Grayson Wolf would have made that same comment? No one responded. Exactly, she continued. And if we go ahead with this partnership, we are validating his behavior. We are telling the world that our values are negotiable, that we'll accept disrespect for the right price. Margaret folded her arms. And what about our employees, our shareholders, our clients? Are we ready to explain a tanking stock price to them because of a personal insult? This isn't personal, Ava replied, steady and sure. It's institutional. If I accept this deal, what does it say to every young woman, every person of color working in our company, watching how I respond, that we'll let them be disrespected too if the numbers are right? A pause, long, dense, thoughtful. Claire spoke up. I believe our values are our currency. We've built this company on transparency, respect, and resilience. If we sell those values now, we may win a contract, but we'll lose the trust we've worked years to earn. Peter looked between them, visibly torn. You're asking us to risk everything. Ava finally took her seat, her voice dropping just slightly. I'm asking you to decide what everything really means. Money is replaceable. Integrity isn't. The room fell still. Then Ava leaned forward, not as a CEO pleading for votes, but as a leader making a final declaration. As of this moment, I am officially withdrawing from the Wolf Partnership. This decision is mine and I accept all the fallout, but I won't compromise who we are for any dollar amount. For a beat, there was nothing, no movement, no reply. Then, one by one, people looked at her differently. Some with admiration, some with quiet respect, some with reluctant acknowledgement. The meeting adjourned, not with applause, but with a kind of solemnity. The kind that comes from realizing something irreversible had just happened. That afternoon, Ava held a press conference. Standing behind a sleek podium in a white blazer, hair pulled into a neat bun, she faced a sea of microphones and flashing cameras. The business world was on edge, waiting. My dignity is not for sale, she began. At any price. The words rippled like thunder. She could feel the shift immediately, the media's collective inhale, gasps, whispers, then the flood. Are you saying the deal is off? A reporter shouted from the second row. Yes, Ava replied calmly. I've officially withdrawn from the Wolf Partnership. We cannot and will not do business with entities that do not respect the basic dignity of individuals. Are you worried about the fallout? Ava nodded slightly. I am, but not for myself. I worry that for too long, silence has been seen as professionalism, and I refuse to be silent when basic human decency is dismissed as optional. A young female journalist raised her hand. Do you think this sets a precedent? I hope it does, Ava answered. I hope it tells every executive, every company, every institution that the era of impunity is over. That respect isn't a courtesy, it's a requirement. The conference ended with a roar of conversation, headlines already being typed mid-sentence. Ava walked off stage with Claire beside her, heart still pounding, but not from fear, from relief. She had done it. She had stood her ground. In the Wolf Mansion, meanwhile, chaos unfurled like wildfire. Grayson Wolf stood in front of a 75-inch flat screen watching Ava's press conference replay for the third time. She really went through with it, he muttered. Edward Wolf entered behind him, cold fury etched across his face. You think this is funny? Grayson turned, defensive. It was just a joke. Edward's eyes burned. You humiliated her. You tanked a deal that could have secured our next 2 generations. And now, the world's calling for your head. Grayson scoffed. They'll move on. They always do. But even as he said it, his phone lit up with a fresh alert. A video, 2 minutes long. Someone had filmed the exact moment of his insult shot from a discreet angle, likely a waiter's phone. His voice echoed from the screen. Did someone mix up and bring the help in early? Grayson's face drained of color. Within hours, the clip was everywhere. Millions of views. Hashtags trending worldwide. Had dignity above, all respect is priceless. The court of public opinion had entered the game and it was ruthless. Back in Ava's office, Claire burst in, eyes wide. It's happening. The video's gone viral. They're calling it a reckoning. Ava closed her laptop slowly, lips pressing into a thoughtful line. This isn't about revenge, she said. It's about responsibility. Claire nodded. Still, this is big. Bigger than us. Ava looked out her window toward the horizon, where the sky turned gold over the city. Her voice was quiet. Then let's make it count. By sundown, the digital wildfire had become an unstoppable inferno. The 2-minute video of Grayson Wolf's smug insult raced through every platform, accompanied by captions that needed no embellishment. "This is what old money thinks of modern leadership," one headline blared. "A $900 million deal undone by 2 seconds of arrogance," read another. Within 24 hours, it wasn't just tech blogs and industry forums dissecting the scandal. It was front-page news. Business anchors, ethics professors, activists, and even late-night comedians weighed in. The verdict was nearly unanimous. Ava Monroe hadn't walked away from a deal, she had drawn a line in the sand. Outside Wolf Corporation headquarters, the protest began small. A few dozen people with signs, many of them young professionals and students, holding placards that read, "We are not your help. Respect is the bottom line." By midday, that crowd swelled to hundreds. Inside the building, panic took hold. Conference calls ran long and loud. Emails flew like shrapnel. Executives and PR consultants scrambled to craft statements, brainstorm damage control, anything that might stem the hemorrhaging. Wolf's stock dropped 11% by noon. That afternoon, the board convened an emergency session. For the first time in decades, the Wolf name wasn't being spoken with reverence, but with hesitation. Thomas Gallagher, the board chairman and a longtime friend of Edward Wolf, sat at the head of the table, his tone grim. "We're bleeding public trust. Our partners are distancing. We're seeing withdrawal from at least 5 pending deals." He glanced down at his notes, then locked eyes with Edward. "We have to act now." Edward didn't argue. He sat quietly, his jaw tight, fingers pressed together as if holding back a tide. Gallagher continued. "Grayson's presence on the leadership team is indefensible right now. We're suspending him, effective immediately, pending internal review. If we want to have any hope of repairing our credibility, this is the minimum step." Edward nodded, slowly. "Do it." Across the building, in his corner office, Grayson was still watching Ava Monroe's press conference on loop. Not by choice, but because he couldn't look away. Her composure, her clarity, her refusal to budge. It haunted him. He didn't hear the knock on his door until it opened. Thomas Gallagher entered with 2 HR representatives. Their faces were stern. "Grayson, you've been officially suspended from all leadership roles effective immediately," Gallagher said. "You'll vacate your office today." Grayson shot to his feet. "You're kidding. This is still my family's company." Gallagher's tone hardened. "And you've single-handedly dragged it into the worst crisis in its history." Grayson's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked at them, stunned, like someone waking from a dream to find the house already on fire. An hour later, he walked out of the building through a side door, escorted by security. No press conference, no apology. No one around him clapped or sneered. Just silence. That night, Ava Monroe watched the footage from her own office. She didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in Grayson's fall, only a sense of closure. She was still sifting through a mountain of proposals from companies that had reached out over the past 48 hours, some offering partnership terms far more generous than the original Wolf deal. Names she'd chased for years were now knocking on her door. Sterling Global, North Star Industries, Crescent Solutions. Claire Dawson placed the latest stack of proposals on Ava's desk, face lit with cautious optimism. "This one's from Wilson Group, 20% above market valuation. And they included a letter saying your stance is exactly the kind of leadership they want to align with." Ava nodded. "We'll read it, but we won't rush. We're not building an empire on applause." Claire smiled. "Still, you've won. Everyone sees it." But Ava shook her head. "This wasn't about winning. It was about surviving a test of what I really stand for." She looked up, her voice gentle but firm. "And proving that survival isn't always about compromise. Sometimes it's about walking away." Across the world, Ava Monroe's story began to take on a life of its own. From college students to boardroom leaders, her stand was quoted, debated, admired. Hashtags continued to trend. Articles dubbed her the CEO who said no. Invitations poured in from TED, the Global Ethics Forum, even Harvard Business School. But Ava turned most of them down. She didn't want to become a symbol without substance. Her mission hadn't changed. Build, lead, protect her company. 1 week later, Bennett Technologies announced a new partnership. A multi-company alliance valued at $1.2 billion. The press went wild. Ava kept the press release brief. We chose partners who not only believe in innovation, but in the dignity of every person they work with. This is how the future gets built. Back at the Wolf estate, Grayson sat alone in his once prized office, stripped of authority, watching the announcement play out across 6 business channels. The numbers, the acclaim, the speed, it all stunned him. And more than that, it humiliated him. But for the first time, he didn't lash out. He just stared at the screen, whispering words he hadn't used before. I was wrong. In the hallway, Edward Wolf paused outside his son's office. He didn't knock. He didn't go in. He simply turned away, shoulders heavy with the knowledge that some mistakes, no matter how public or costly, must be carried alone. And Ava? She sat at her desk as the sun dipped behind the skyline, reading yet another message from a young woman. I saw what you did. I've faced similar insults. Thank you for showing us how to walk away with our heads held high. Ava replied personally. One line, you deserve better. Always remember that. 2 weeks after the fallout, the media frenzy had started to shift. But Ava Monroe's story wasn't fading. Instead, it was evolving. She had gone from being the subject of a viral headline to a symbol reshaping the conversation around power, prejudice, and principle in corporate America. News outlets stopped referring to the scandal as just a corporate blunder and began calling it what it really was, a defining cultural moment. And Ava? She hadn't changed her routine. She still rose before dawn, still took her morning walk through the quiet downtown park, still arrived at the office early, coffee in hand, ready to face whatever the day brought. But this version of Ava, quiet, focused, composed, now carried the weight of millions watching her every move. In her inbox, messages from strangers poured in. Students, young professionals, older women, parents, even competitors, all echoing the same truth. You've changed the way we think about leadership. One message read, I've worked at my firm for 11 years, constantly passed over, dismissed in meetings. But after watching your stand, I finally spoke up. I didn't get applause, but I got my self-respect back. Another, from a young entrepreneur. Your story made me realize success without integrity isn't success. Thank you for giving that clarity to people like me who needed to hear it. Ava saved every message, not to relive the praise, but to remind herself of the responsibility she now carried. In the conference room, Claire Dawson stood before the executive team, delivering an update on the company's position post-Wolf. The numbers were beyond promising. Revenue projections for Q3 are up 18%. Public sentiment is overwhelmingly positive. We've picked up 5 new corporate clients who cited our uncompromising ethics as a deciding factor. Ava, your decision didn't hurt us. It elevated us. The room broke into quiet applause, but Ava didn't bask in it. She simply nodded and said, then let's earn that trust every day, not just today. Meanwhile, the Wolf family's world continued to erode. 3 board members had resigned. 2 of their largest partners had formally terminated contracts. Media scrutiny hadn't let up, and now regulators were quietly asking questions about other possible issues inside the Wolf organization. It wasn't just about a comment anymore. It was about the culture that allowed such a comment to go unchallenged, and what else that silence might have hidden. Grayson Wolf, suspended and publicly disgraced, had retreated into seclusion. The once proud heir was now the most recognizable symbol of unchecked privilege gone wrong. For days, he didn't leave the estate. He barely answered calls. Even Edward Wolf, his father, had distanced himself, until one evening, when Grayson finally broke the silence. He walked into the family study where his father sat by the fire, reviewing a crisis report with bloodshot eyes and a half-empty glass of scotch. I need to fix this, Grayson said, voice flat but earnest. Edward didn't look up. It's already too late to fix it the way you're thinking. Grayson sat across from him. Then what do I do? Now Edward looked at him, really looked. And for the first time, Grayson saw not just disappointment, but fatigue, regret. You listen. You learn. And for once in your life, You shut up and accept that your name can't shield you. There was no rage in his voice, just reality, just the bitter tone of a man who'd watched his legacy crack under the weight of a son who had never truly been told no. Grayson nodded slowly. For the first time, he didn't argue. Across town, Ava sat quietly in her office, reviewing the terms of the new multi-partner alliance, a deal now worth more than the original $900 million, but crafted on an entirely different foundation. Where the Wolf deal had been about power and scale, this was about innovation, impact, and shared values. Still, a sense of unfinished business lingered. Because while she had walked away from the Wolves, and while the world had applauded her for it, there was one group she hadn't yet addressed directly, the people within her own company. The ones who had witnessed the moment on video, the ones who had heard the rumors, the ones who had quietly, privately drawn their own conclusions about how far their leader was willing to go to protect them. So she scheduled an all-hands meeting. Not a video message, not a memo, a face-to-face gathering, company-wide. When the day arrived, employees packed the hall. Some stood along the walls, others sat on the floor. From interns to department heads, every eye was on her as she stepped up to the simple podium at the front of the room. She didn't carry a script, didn't open with pleasantries. She just began. I know you've all seen the headlines, and I know you've all formed your own thoughts about what happened with the Wolf deal. The room was silent, and I wanted to tell you this directly. I didn't walk away from that partnership to make a point or grab headlines. I walked away because dignity isn't a luxury, it's a right. And no amount of money is worth giving it up. Not for me, not for you, not for any of us. A soft murmur moved through the crowd. Surprise, approval, emotion. Ava continued. You deserve to work for a company that respects you, that defends you, that stands up even when it costs us. And I promise you, that is the company we're going to continue to build. The employees erupted in applause. But this time, Ava didn't stop it. She stood quietly, let it fill the room, let them feel what it meant to be led by someone who didn't just win contracts, but who held the line. That evening, as she left the building, the sun dipped low behind the city skyline, casting long shadows that stretched across the street. Ava paused at the top of the steps and looked out, not to admire the view, but to take in the moment. It wasn't just about this day, or this fight, or even this victory. It was about what came next. Because walking away from one deal had opened the door to a new chapter one where she didn't just lead a company, she led a movement. In the weeks that followed, Ava Monroe's name became more than a headline. It became a litmus test. Corporations across the country, and even abroad, found themselves faced with a quiet reckoning. Were they building their empires with integrity, or just with capital? Panels at business schools started citing her decision. MBA students dissected the case not just for its financial implications, but for the values it amplified. The AVA standard, some called it, a shorthand for when leadership aligned with ethics, not ego. But Ava didn't let the praise distract her. Every morning she arrived early, her steps steady, her calendar full. The surge in partnerships and public support hadn't changed her discipline. It had only sharpened her focus. Still, she was aware that the spotlight came with shadows. For all the support she'd received, there were critics too. Editorials claiming she was too emotional, reckless with shareholder value, or weaponizing identity politics. A few even suggested her newfound popularity was luck more than leadership. But Ava had faced worse. She printed out the harshest article and pinned it to her office wall. Not out of spite, but as a reminder. Every move worth making will be challenged by those invested in the status quo. One rainy afternoon, as clouds settled thick over the skyline, Ava received an unexpected message. The Global Leadership Summit had extended a personal invitation, not just to attend, but to speak. The theme? The cost of dignity. At first, she hesitated. Ava had always believed in action over speech, but Claire Dawson, reading the message over her shoulder, nudged gently. This isn't about press. It's about anchoring what you've already done. You've already spoken with your choices, Maybe it's time to add words to it. Ava considered that. Then she accepted. 3 weeks later, she stepped onto a stage in a massive auditorium in Geneva, Switzerland. Over 2,000 attendees filled the seats, CEOs, academics, students, activists, all watching. She wore white, again simple, understated, but unmistakably bold. As the lights dimmed and a hush fell over the room, Ava approached the podium. For a moment, she simply stood. Then she began. Dignity is not a line item. You can't write it off or buy it back. Yet time and again, we are asked to choose between dignity and opportunity. And most of us, myself included, have been tempted to think the latter is more valuable. She let the words settle. But I want to share a truth with you, not from a theory, but from a lived experience. Dignity carries a cost, and that cost is worth it. As Ava recounted the wolf incident, not in scandalous detail, but in quiet reflection, the audience leaned in. Her voice wasn't angry or accusatory. It was clear, steady, deeply human. I've been underestimated, talked over, mocked in boardrooms, and on one very public occasion I was insulted before an entire room of powerful people who said nothing. A few audible gasps rippled through the crowd. That night, I walked away from a $900 million deal, and I was told I was reckless, that I was letting emotion win, that I'd pay for my pride. And maybe I did. But here's what they didn't understand. My pride wasn't the cost. It was the asset. As she spoke, cameras captured her face lit by the stage lights, composed, passionate, unwavering. I didn't walk away because I was hurt. I walked away because leadership without integrity is hollow. Because every time we stay silent in the face of disrespect, we become complicit in our own devaluation. A pause. We teach people how to treat us, not just as individuals, but as organizations, as industries, as a society. And what we allow becomes the norm. Her speech closed not with applause bait, but with a soft challenge. To everyone listening, whether you lead a team or just yourself, ask this: what are you building and what are you trading away to build it? Because success without dignity is failure in disguise. The silence after her final words was electric. Then the room stood as one. Applause thundered through the auditorium, not just out of admiration, but because they recognized what they had just witnessed, a rare, living proof that principle could not only survive, but lead. Back in the US, the ripples continued. Clips from Ava's speech dominated feeds. Influencers quoted her. Professors replayed her words in classrooms. Advocacy groups printed her final question on shirts and banners. But in one penthouse, silence reigned. Grayson Wolf watched the replay alone, the volume low. His once sharp expression now duller, stripped of its arrogance. He no longer barked at assistants or made flippant jokes. After weeks of fallout, media exile, and the loss of key relationships, Grayson had begun to understand something Ava never had to be taught. Respect is not owed, it's earned. And once lost, it takes a lifetime to rebuild. His phone remained dark, no business calls, no invitations, and then one message appeared, from a name he hadn't expected, Ava Monroe. He opened it. Grayson, we both know how this began, but I believe how something ends matters more. If you're willing to learn, listen, and lead differently, you can still do good. Not for me, for the people depending on you to change. He stared at it for a long time. He didn't reply. Not yet. But for the first time in months, he looked in the mirror and didn't flinch. Meanwhile, Ava returned from Geneva to a crowd of employees waiting in the company lobby, applauding not just their CEO but their symbol. She didn't make a speech. She simply smiled, nodded, and whispered to Claire as they walked through, back to work. Because for Ava Monroe, the mission had never been about spotlight. It was always about building something stronger than the old systems. Not with brute force, but with unshakable values. And now that the world was finally watching, she was just getting started. The momentum didn't slow. If anything, it intensified. Within a month of the Global Leadership Summit, Ava Monroe became one of the most sought-after voices in both business and social advocacy circles. But she declined most of the invitations. She wasn't interested in becoming a celebrity. She had a company to run, a culture to protect, a mission to fulfill. And quietly, without fanfare, Ava began to reshape her organization from the inside out. She launched a new internal initiative called the Foundation of Worth, a program dedicated to mentoring underrepresented talent, fostering ethical leadership, and establishing cross-company dialogues on workplace dignity. It wasn't about optics, it was infrastructure for change. Across departments, employees felt the shift. Meetings had more voices in the room. Feedback loops grew stronger. Team leads were trained not just in project management, but in emotional awareness and inclusivity. One new hire, a young black engineer named Jordan Blake, pulled Claire Dawson aside after his third week. "You know," he said, "I've worked at 3 startups before this, and none of them even asked me what I needed to thrive. Here, someone sat down and actually listened." Claire nodded, smiling. "That's the Ava effect. It's not a PR campaign, it's personal." Meanwhile, across the business world, companies that had once ignored ethical concerns were scrambling to adapt. Shareholder activism surged. Internal diversity audits became mandatory. Firms began issuing values statements, not because they were pressured to, but because the market now demanded it. A new phrase entered the corporate vocabulary: dignity index. It started as a trending idea on LinkedIn, but within weeks, consulting firms began drafting real frameworks, scoring companies not just on profit, but on how they treated people. Ava had nothing to do with its creation, but she had everything to do with its inspiration. One morning, while reviewing quarterly numbers, Ava received a phone call. It was from Naomi Carter, an award-winning actor and activist known for her fierce outspokenness. "Ava," Naomi said without greeting, "you're not just running a company. You're leading a shift in how the world sees power. I'd like to work with you, build something bigger, something global." Ava didn't hesitate. "I'm listening." Within a week, the two women met in person, away from cameras and headlines, in a quiet loft in San Francisco. They spoke for hours about ethics, race, class, pressure, grace, legacy. Naomi leaned in at one point and said, "You're the first businesswoman I've seen in years who's not afraid to take a hit for doing what's right. I want to help amplify that." From that conversation, a new nonprofit was born, Unshakable. Its mission, to provide leadership training, legal resources, and visibility for professionals who face systemic injustice in the workplace. Ava didn't put her name on the front. She didn't want it to be about her. But donors and partners flocked in anyway, because everyone knew whose vision it was. Back in the boardroom of Wolf Corporation, the atmosphere was starkly different. Gone were the long mahogany tables polished to a mirror shine, the air of unchallenged supremacy, the casual confidence of inherited legacy. Now there were whiteboards filled with PR recovery strategies, crisis consultants pacing, legal teams reviewing diversity and equity reports that had been buried for years. Edward Wolf, once untouchable, now faced scrutiny from regulators, activist shareholders, and the media. Grayson Wolf was still absent from any public-facing role. His name had become a liability, his suspension now indefinite. The brand damage wasn't just reputational, it was material. Entire portfolios had been liquidated, sponsorships canceled, global partners had blacklisted them. In one private meeting, an international investor said bluntly, "You can't fix this with brochures. You need a cultural transplant." And for once, Edward didn't argue. That night he walked through the estate's long halls alone, portraits of ancestors lining the walls, each one a face of legacy, power, wealth. He paused at one. His father, who had once told him, "Reputation isn't what they write about you, it's what they whisper after you've left the room." Edward sat in his private office and stared at a notepad. Then he wrote something no Wolf ever had before, a letter of apology addressed to Ava Monroe. It wasn't groveling, it wasn't strategic, it was human. He admitted that his silence that night had spoken louder than any insult. He acknowledged that he had chosen pride over justice, and he expressed his hope, quiet, perhaps futile, that one day his family might do better. He didn't send it right away. He let it sit on his desk for days, as a reminder of the cost of inaction. Across town, Ava continued her work with steady determination. Each day, she carved out time to meet with junior staffers, answer questions directly, and sit in on internal brainstorming sessions. She wasn't above the trenches, she preferred them. And it wasn't long before another major turning point arrived. The White House extended an invitation, a roundtable on leadership and ethical capitalism. Ava had been selected as one of 5 private sector leaders to participate. She flew to D.C. quietly. No entourage. No press fanfare. Inside the historic hall, she sat among senators, economists, nonprofit leaders, and executives from industries as wide-ranging as aerospace, healthcare, and tech. When her turn came to speak, Ava didn't reach for complicated jargon. She spoke plainly. Markets rise and fall. Algorithms evolve. But people don't forget how they were treated. The next generation of leadership won't be built on who has the biggest margins. It'll be built on who can lead with courage, even when no one's watching. The room listened, because by now, everyone knew. When Ava Monroe spoke, it wasn't theory, it was lived truth. That night, Ava returned to her hotel room, opened her laptop, and typed a short email to her team. Tomorrow, we start something new, something that reaches beyond us. I'll explain at 9 a.m. sharp. She hit send, then stood by the window, looking out over the Capitol, city lights glowing beneath the stars. Not so long ago, she had walked out of a mansion where no one believed she belonged. Now she was walking into rooms where her voice wasn't just heard, it was needed, and Ava knew in her bones, this was only the beginning. At 9:00 a.m. sharp the next morning, Ava Monroe stood in front of her executive team at Bennett Technologies. The energy in the room was electric, charged with anticipation. She didn't open with numbers, charts, or slides. She opened with a question. What if we stopped trying to be the biggest and focused on becoming the most meaningful? The room quieted, heads tilted. This wasn't the kind of conversation usually sparked in a corporate strategy meeting. I've spent the last few months listening to our employees, to our partners, to people around the world. And one truth keeps rising to the surface: people want to work with and for companies that remember what it means to be human. She clicked the remote. A single slide appeared on the screen. Bennett Collective. Below the name, Innovation, with Conscience. We're launching a new division, a space where we incubate not just tech products but social solutions, where we partner with communities, with students, with local governments, with people who've been left out of the digital revolution. Eyes widened across the room. Ava Monroe continued. Think education access tools, ethical AI standards, rural broadband programs, micro-entrepreneurship platforms, and every project will be co-created with the people it's meant to serve, not for them, but with them. Claire Dawson leaned forward. Is this a nonprofit arm? Ava shook her head. It's a new model, profitable, scalable, and rooted in shared value, not just shareholder value. The idea was radical, but it landed with clarity. It wasn't about charity. It was about changing the function of power, about wielding innovation not just as a tool for growth, but as a catalyst for equity. The room erupted in questions, eager, hopeful ones. Ava answered every single one with poise and precision. By the end of the meeting, the leadership team was on board, inspired, ready. That afternoon, Ava stepped into her office to find a small envelope on her desk. Unmarked. No logo. No return address. Inside, a single handwritten note. Ms. Monroe, I failed to speak when it mattered, and I failed my son by never teaching him what real power requires. You didn't just teach us, you showed us. I wish you continued strength. Edward Wolfe. Ava stared at the letter for a long moment. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt still. Then she folded it, placed it in the drawer of her desk, and moved on. 2 weeks later, Bennett Collective launched with a live announcement. It wasn't held at a hotel ballroom or a high-rise rooftop. It was hosted at a community tech hub in Oakland, surrounded by students, artists, local leaders, and small business owners. There were no VIP rows, no velvet ropes. Ava stood in the center of the crowd with a microphone, wearing jeans and a simple black blazer. We're here because the future isn't just invented in towers. It's co-built in neighborhoods, and from now on, we're building it together. The event was live-streamed to over 2 million viewers. Within days, applications for collaboration flooded in from nonprofit developers in Detroit, educational leaders in Ghana, small-town libraries across the Midwest. The message was clear. People were hungry for inclusion, and Bennett Technologies was no longer just a tech company. It was a vehicle for change. Meanwhile, the Wolves remained in damage control mode. Their attempts at rebranding felt hollow. Social media users called them out for token gestures, performative apologies, and vague promises. Even with Grayson Wolf still suspended and Edward Wolf stepping back from public roles, trust remained elusive. In one leaked internal memo, a PR consultant wrote, "No campaign will restore credibility until the Wolves make real, transparent structural changes, and even then, the public may never forget." Grayson, increasingly isolated, had moved to a private family property in upstate New York. He'd stopped granting interviews. For the first time, he was truly alone, with no handlers, no filters, and no one left to blame. Each day, he received reports from the corporate board, and each day, he saw the same words: withdrawn, declined, divested. The empire was cracking, not from scandal, but from the slow, relentless erosion of moral authority. And though he never said it aloud, he began to understand something Ava had known all along. You don't protect power by clinging to it. You protect it by using it responsibly, or you lose it. Back in San Francisco, the Bennett office was more alive than ever. One afternoon, Ava walked into a team session where new engineers were testing accessibility tools designed for visually impaired users. She sat beside them, asked questions, took notes, offered feedback. One of the interns, barely 21, whispered to a colleague, "She actually listens, like, really listens." That, more than anything, was Ava's secret weapon. Not her resume, not her titles, her attention. She made people feel seen, heard, valued. In a world increasingly obsessed with speed and dominance, she slowed down enough to build something real. As spring turned to summer, the impact of Ava's movement was visible not just in headlines, but in hard numbers. Bennett Technologies became one of the fastest-growing mid-sized firms in the country, but not just in revenue. In retention, in satisfaction, in mission alignment. And Unshakable, the nonprofit Ava co-founded with Naomi Carter, had now opened offices in 5 cities, offering mentorship, legal defense, and startup grants to marginalized professionals. In one press feature, a journalist wrote, "Ava Monroe didn't burn bridges, she rerouted the entire map." But Ava never let the praise rest too long. She saw it all as temporary, useful only if it led to deeper systems change. Her mission was never about winning the moment. It was about reshaping the future. One day, one decision, one principled stand at a time. By midsummer, what began as a single act of resistance had evolved into a powerful network of change spanning continents, crossing industries, and challenging long-standing systems from within. But Ava Monroe never claimed credit. Instead, she quietly reinforced a culture where credit was shared, ideas welcomed, and ethics built into the blueprint of every decision. At Bennett Technologies, the once hierarchical org chart had been subtly restructured. Mid-level managers now had direct access to executive leaders. Quarterly open floor sessions allowed any employee to pitch an idea or challenge a process, an innovation that sparked dozens of improvements, from product design to hiring practices. More than half of these ideas came from voices who previously would have been dismissed. One such voice was Elena Cruz, a soft-spoken product designer who had joined just months earlier. At an open floor session, she stood, cleared her throat, and proposed a real-time language interpretation feature for the company's new virtual learning platform. Her reasoning was simple. My mom doesn't speak English. She wants to learn tech like I do, but she never makes it past the login page. Ava didn't just approve the idea, she funded it personally. Within 6 weeks, the prototype was complete. Within 10, it was rolled out to a test audience of immigrant families across the West Coast. The result? An immediate 27% spike in platform usage from non-English-speaking users. It wasn't a global-scale breakthrough, but it was proof when dignity leads, access follows. Outside the walls of Bennett, the impact continued to snowball. The Dignity Index framework, once a social media idea, had now been formalized by several global consultancies. Public companies began incorporating it into their ESG disclosures. Private firms used it as a recruitment differentiator. Ava's name was often cited in the footnotes, though she had no formal hand in its development. One high-ranking executive at a Fortune 50 firm confessed anonymously to a journalist, "We used to just watch market cap, now we watch what Ava Monroe is doing." Back at Unshakable, the nonprofit's 5th office opened in Detroit with an inaugural roundtable featuring civic leaders, tech entrepreneurs, and educators. Naomi Carter led the session. Ava joined quietly, sitting in the circle like everyone else. When asked to speak, she kept it brief. Real power doesn't look like dominance. It looks like making space for others to rise alongside you. Her words were tweeted, clipped, quoted. But Ava didn't linger afterward. She stayed just long enough to shake hands with every new participant before catching a late flight back to San Francisco. That evening, at home, Ava stood barefoot in her apartment's kitchen, sipping tea and reading a message from Jordan Blake, the young engineer she'd met on his first week. "Hey Ava, my cousin back in Atlanta just got hired at a company that modeled their onboarding after hours. She said they referenced you and Bennett like a case study. I know you don't like big speeches, but I thought you should know. Your influence is turning into a template." Ava smiled, then typed back, "We're all just paving better roads. I'm glad she found one." Just as she set her phone down, a notification pinged an internal alert from her team's research lead. The flagship Bennett Collective project had crossed 100,000 users in under 90 days. Ava didn't celebrate. She didn't text Claire or post online. She simply stared out her window at the glowing city below, whispering to herself, "It's working." And it was. Not just the programs, the principle behind them. It was resonating, spreading, embedding itself in conversations where it had once been absent. Meetings now began with questions like, "How does this serve the people at the margins?" Or, "Who does this leave out, and how do we bring them in?" Even Ava's competitors began mirroring her approach. One rival CEO, known for her sharp elbows in the past, surprised the industry when she launched a dignity-first initiative of her own. When asked in an interview what sparked the shift, she replied candidly, "Ava Monroe taught us the hard way that leadership without soul is just logistics. I got tired of logistics." But not all developments were positive. In the background, a conservative media outlet began attacking Ava's work, claiming her principles were anti-business, accusing her of promoting reverse discrimination, and publishing opinion pieces aimed at sowing doubt in her motives. Ava didn't respond. She instructed her PR team not to either. Claire, frustrated, said in a meeting, "They're spinning lies. We can't let them control the narrative." But Ava stayed firm. "Our work is the response. Let them throw shadows. We'll keep building light." Still, the attacks continued, eventually culminating in a television segment that looped Ava's speech from Geneva with loaded commentary meant to discredit her. It backfired. Social media erupted in defense. Hashtags like "Ava built this" and "light over noise" trended for days. Influencers, politicians, and celebrities voiced support. But most importantly, employees from inside Bennett Technologies started speaking out. Not in orchestrated statements, but in personal, unscripted posts. One read, "I've worked here for 4 years. Ava didn't just protect her own dignity, she taught me how to protect mine." Another, "This company saved my confidence." And it started with her choosing respect over revenue. In the face of smear, the truth was louder. One evening, after a particularly long day, Ava found herself walking through a neighborhood park. The sky was just beginning to turn violet. She watched kids race across the grass, parents talking on benches, a group of teens recording videos under the golden light. A little girl with braids and a tablet walked by, smiling up at her. "You're that lady who said no," the girl said. Ava blinked. "Said no?" "Yeah," the girl grinned. "Mom said you said no to bad people, and now you help people who build stuff." Ava knelt slightly, smiling. "That's a pretty good summary." The girl nodded proudly, then ran off to join her friends. Ava watched her go heart heavy and light all at once, because in that moment, she saw exactly what all the meetings, interviews, backlash, and victories had truly built. Not just a better company, a better path, one that others could now follow, or widen, or walk freely for the first time. And Ava Monroe vowed silently but firmly, "Whatever comes next, I'll keep walking." Fall arrived quietly, but for Ava Monroe, each passing week brought the kind of transformation that didn't just mark a new season, it marked a new era. Inside the offices of Monroe Technologies, everything felt sharper, more focused. From the engineering floors to the creative studios, there was a hum of energy that wasn't driven by deadlines or profit margins, but by purpose. The walls were no longer just filled with project boards and performance charts. They now featured rotating exhibits of employee stories, portraits and testimonials about resilience, courage, and the moments that shaped them. Each month, a new set was curated. Ava read every word, often silently during her evening walks through the building. One night, she paused at a portrait of an older software developer named Neil, who had immigrated from Bangladesh decades ago. "For years, I made myself smaller just to be allowed in the room. Ava taught us we're not here to fit, we're here to build." Ava stood still for a long time after reading it. These weren't just employees anymore. They were co-architects of something rare, a workplace culture with memory. One that learned from pain, built from trust, and defended dignity, not as a value written in the handbook, but as a lived rhythm of everyday work. Beyond Monroe's walls, the impact only deepened. Universities began offering courses with case studies titled The Monroe Stand. Students debated it not only as a story of leadership ethics, but as a modern reckoning with power, race, and gender in corporate America. At one Ivy League seminar, a student stood and asked, "Wasn't Ava risking the future of thousands of employees by turning down that deal? Shouldn't pragmatism win?" The professor replied, "Sometimes dignity is pragmatism." Ava didn't just reject a deal, she protected the internal culture that allowed every other deal to thrive. Would you rather work for someone who compromises under pressure, or someone who defines pressure by how they carry themselves through it? In another classroom, a young woman whispered to her friend, "I didn't even know someone like her could exist in business." Now she did. And it wasn't just academic. Government bodies took notice too. After months of internal review and public support, Ava was appointed to the President's Advisory Council on Economic Equity. The announcement made headlines, not because she had chased it, but because she hadn't. When the press asked for comment, she simply said, "I'm here to help shape systems where the next generation won't have to fight for the respect that should have been theirs to begin with." At the council's first meeting, a senator leaned toward her and whispered, "You've changed more minds in 1 year than I've done in 2 terms." Ava didn't flinch. "Then let's make sure we use that change for something lasting." Meanwhile, Grayson Wolf remained invisible. Almost no public sightings, no official statements. The once prominent heir had gone almost completely silent, his company slowly rebuilding without him, his image still toxic in the public eye. But something unexpected happened. One afternoon, Ava received a small package at her office. No name, no note, just a book. Letters to a young poet. Inside the cover, underlined in pen, "Perhaps everything terrible is in its deepest being, something helpless that wants help from us." Rainer Maria Rilke. Tucked inside was a folded page, typed, unassuming. "I don't expect forgiveness. I barely understand myself. But I see now what I refused to see before. You didn't destroy anything. You rebuilt something I was too afraid to start. GW. Ava read the note once, twice. Then she placed the book on her shelf, spine facing out. She didn't need to respond. Some lessons didn't require conversation-only acknowledgement. By late October, the Monroe Collective had launched 6 initiatives across 3 continents. From community-owned data cooperatives in Nairobi to AI translation projects in rural Arizona, the work had evolved from theory to practice. One project, Echo, offered anonymous digital reporting tools for workers facing discrimination, already adopted by 5 major companies. But Ava didn't sit back. She still joined field calls, still asked questions, still read user reports line by line. She knew influence could blur into detachment if she wasn't careful, so she stayed close to the ground. And then came the call she hadn't expected. The Global Summit for Human-Centered Leadership invited Ava to keynote their annual closing ceremony. She paused. She had said nearly everything she'd wanted to say. What was left? But that evening, as she watched her team brainstorming in a late-night strategy session, arguing, laughing, building, she realized there was something left. Not for the press, not for the world, but for them. So on a crisp November night, she stood once more under the stage lights. Thousands filled the auditorium. Millions watched online. The world now knew her name, but she began by reminding them of what truly mattered. I didn't come here to tell you how to lead. I came to remind you who you are when no one's watching. She paused. Leadership isn't charisma. It's not vision boards. It's not what you build on your best day. It's what you refuse to break on your worst. We are not here to be powerful. We are here to be responsible for the power we hold, to use it like breath, not to suffocate, but to sustain. Her voice stayed soft, but the truth in it thundered. And when the applause fades, and the cameras stop rolling, if you still choose to honor dignity even in silence, then you've already won. When she finished, the crowd didn't cheer immediately. They stood in quiet awe. It was not a moment of victory. It was a moment of clarity. Because in Ava Monroe, the world didn't just find a leader, it found a mirror, a reminder of the values we forget too easily, and the quiet courage it takes to live them out loud. Winter settled in with quiet authority. The world outside Ava Monroe's office windows glowed under a soft layer of morning frost. Inside, however, the air remained warm alive with ambition, clarity, and the steady rhythm of progress. It had been nearly a year since the night she walked out of the Wolf Mansion, 12 months since she chose dignity over a $900 million deal. Since then, the world had changed, not in a cinematic sweep, but in subtle tectonic shifts. In the way boardrooms now left an open seat for voices they used to ignore. In the way students pointed to Ava in essays about ethical resilience. In the way professionals walked into negotiations with a little more fire behind their eyes, and a little more value in their voices. And Ava? She was still walking the same hallway each morning, still sipping the same black coffee from the corner shop, still meeting interns with the same level of attention she gave investors. Her world had expanded, but her core had never moved. She wasn't chasing legacy, she was cultivating alignment. In early December, as Bennett Collective prepared to launch its most ambitious project yet, an open-source infrastructure for equitable tech hiring, Ava called a rare, full-company meeting. Every employee, from engineers and designers to operations and security, gathered in the open auditorium on the 6th floor. Some sat cross-legged on the floor. Others leaned against the walls. The room was buzzing, not with nervousness, but with quiet expectation. Ava walked onto the stage in a charcoal blazer and crisp jeans. No script, no slideshow, just her voice. This time last year, most people thought this company would fold. A few knowing chuckles rippled across the room. But you didn't. You held the line with me. You helped rebuild something stronger, clearer, and more aligned than anything we've ever done. So today, I want to tell you something I haven't said enough. Thank you. The room fell still. You weren't just employees during that storm. You were my mirror. You showed me what leadership looks like when it's shared. You reminded me that even when the world gets loud, it's the quiet voices in the room that shape its future. Applause broke out, genuine, grounded. Ava smiled but didn't linger in it. Now, as we grow, I want us to remember, this company isn't a platform for fame. It's a foundation for impact. We're not building fast, we're building forever. That became the new motto, build forever. And it wasn't long before the world adopted it. Build forever trended across platforms, not as a slogan, but as a philosophy. Schools taught it, activists used it, entrepreneurs printed it on the backs of their laptops. Because it meant something bigger than longevity. It meant building in a way that deserved to last. As the year came to a close, Ava turned down another flurry of media appearances and awards. She believed the best work spoke for itself, and that the people doing the work deserved the spotlight more than the ones receiving the microphone. But there was one invitation she didn't decline. A high school in South LA invited her to speak at their winter assembly. It wasn't fancy. No camera crews. Just a dusty gymnasium, a makeshift podium, and 5 rows of folding chairs. When Ava arrived, the principal met her at the door. He was stunned she'd accepted. "Most people with your schedule wouldn't have time for us." Ava shook his hand warmly. "You're the reason I make time." She spoke for 20 minutes, not from a stage, but standing among the students. You don't need someone else's permission to believe in your worth. The world may try to silence you, overlook you, dress you up as something you're not. But your dignity doesn't need a costume. It needs courage and consistency. Afterward, a shy girl raised her hand. "Didn't you ever want to fight back? Like scream at them?" Ava smiled gently. "Oh, I did. Many times. But I learned something. The loudest fight isn't always the one with the most noise. Sometimes it's the one where you don't back down, even if you're the only one still standing." The students stood and clapped awkwardly at first, then with mounting energy. Ava left quietly after the assembly. No press, no announcement. Just a quiet drive home under the golden streaks of sunset. That night, she returned to her apartment and sat by the window overlooking the city. A year ago, she had walked out of a gilded room filled with power, wealth, and cruelty. Today, she sat in a modest living space filled with light, letters, books, and unshakable purpose. Her phone buzzed once, just a text from Claire. "You did it. The impossible. And you never lost your center." Ava replied with just 4 words. "Still building, still grounded." She stood, made tea, and opened her notebook, already sketching plans for the year ahead. And somewhere, in a quiet boardroom in a city far away, a young woman spoke up in a meeting she would have once stayed silent in. She said, "I'm not comfortable with how this partner treats our junior staff." Someone rolled their eyes. But she stood firm. Because she remembered Ava Monroe, and in her mind, she whispered the words she had heard echo across every article, summit, and hallway over the past year. Dignity isn't optional. That is the legacy Ava built. Not one etched in granite or carved on plaques, but living, breathing, moving. In every room where someone chooses courage over comfort. In every boardroom where silence is broken. In every young leader who walks away from what's easy and steps into what's right. She didn't just redefine leadership. She reminded us who it belongs to those who lead with heart, to those who refuse to trade decency for deals, to those who understand that true power isn't something you hold, it's something you honor.